Good evening. This video is about national and international law on the rights of children with special needs. Content, introduction, international law on the rights of children with disabilities. Under that, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, United Nations Convention on Rights of the People with Disabilities, Convention on the Rights of the Child, human rights instruments and high-level decisions reinforcing the rights of persons with disabilities, national law on the rights of children with disabilities, the Constitution and other legislature, government regulations and policies, protection of the rights of persons with disabilities, and proposed disability rights draft bill. Introduction. Over the years, people with disabilities are considered as a marginalized group within the society. Until the last 2 decades of 20th century, they were unable to represent their views as a community in national or international decision-making forums. As a result of the great struggle led by disability rights activists and members of the non-governmental organizations in 2006, United Nations Convention for the Rights of the Person with Disabilities and its optional protocol was formed as a first human rights treaty within the 21st century. Today, it is estimated that over 1 billion people, or more than of the global population, are suffering with some form of disability. Out of them, nearly 400 million are living in developing countries. Therefore, since the last 3 decades, through multiple regional and international programs, the international community has taken various positive steps to identify the specific problems and find necessary solutions to improve their living standards. International law on the rights of children with special needs. First, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, UDHR. In Article 1, it says that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights, and are entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. United Nations Convention on Rights of the People with Disabilities, UNCRPD. Article 1 states that the persons with disabilities include those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments, which in interaction with various barriers may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. UNCRPD Convention and its optional protocol after its adaptation on 30th December 2006, over 160 countries and regional organizations have ratified the convention through the enabling legislation. In 2006, United Nations Convention on the Rights of Peoples with Disabilities, UNCRPD, was formed to ensure disabled person well-being and social security as they are the world's largest minority. Persons with all types of disabilities have a right to enjoy all human rights and fundamental freedom without any discrimination. The convention specifically identifies the right to accessibility, medical treatment, rehabilitation, and personal mobility as rights specific to develop their well-being and inherent dignity. To ensure the meaningful implementation of the above paragraphs, the convention emphasized that the state parties must adopt legislative, administrative, and other measures to implement enumerated rights, abolish or amend existing laws, regulations, customs, and practices that discriminate against persons with disabilities, and adopt an inclusive approach to protect and promote the rights of persons with disabilities in all policies and programs as the general obligations, CRPD Article 4. Further, the convention identifies the public awareness and equal accessibility to physical environment, transportation, and communication as the necessary elements to realize the equal treatment for the people with disabilities. CRPD Article 8 and 9. CRPD specifies the civil and political and economic and social and cultural rights specified for the well-being of the people with disabilities. Among them, apart from the human rights accepted in the United Nations 7 core human rights treaties, which are most significant: right to right of equal access to justice, freedom from abuse and exploitation, right to personal mobility, right to habilitation and rehabilitation. The CRPD has further established a system of monitoring and implementation. CRPD includes final provisions that govern the treaty's operation. Convention on the Rights of the Child. The CRC identified 4 general principles that provide the foundation for the realization of all other rights: non-discrimination, the best interest of the child, survival and development, respect for the views of the child. The principle of non-discrimination is reflected in Article 2 of the CRC that expressly prohibits discrimination on the grounds of disability. Says that state parties shall respect and ensure the rights set forth in the present convention to each child without discrimination of any kind, irrespective of the child's disability or other status. Article 23 of the CRC refers to the obligations of state parties and recognizes that a child with mental or physical disabilities is entitled to enjoy a full and decent life in conditions that ensure dignity, promote self-reliance, and facilitate the child's active participation in the community. The child's right not to be separated from his or her family, services and assistance to support parents in their child-rearing responsibilities, protection from injury, neglect, and any form of violence, protection of children deprived of a family environment, refugee children, periodic review of treatment, the child's right to free and compulsory primary education, to secondary and vocational education, and the prevention of dropout. This article is special and this can apply for the situation of Sri Lanka. Children belonging to minorities and indigenous people, Article 30, from work that interferes the education. Protection from abuse, protection from sexual exploitation, protection from torture or other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, and from deprivation of liberty. Right to rehabilitative care for victims of neglect, exploitation, abuse, of degrading treatment. Human rights instrument and high-level decisions reinforcing the rights of persons with disabilities. Complementing the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, and the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the following texts and international events specifically address the rights of persons with disabilities. First, 1971, Declaration on the Rights of Mentally Retarded Persons stipulates that a person with an intellectual impairment is accorded the same rights as any other person. 1975, Declaration on the Rights of Disabled Persons proclaims the equal and civil and political rights of all disabled persons and sets standards for equal treatment and access to services. 1981, International Year of Disabled Person, United Nations. 1982, World Program of Action Concerning Disabled Person. 1983 to 1992, this is the International Decade of Disabled Persons. And 1990, World Declaration on Education for All and Framework for Action to Meet Basic Learning Needs adopted at the World Conference on Education for All in Thailand in March 1990, promotes equal access to education to every category of disabled person as an integral part of the education system. In 1993, United Nations Standard Rules on the Equalization of Opportunities for Persons with Disabilities provide detailed guidelines for policy development and implementation. From 1993 to 2002 is declared as Asian and Pacific Decade of Disabled Person. In 1994, Salamanca Statement and the Framework for Action on Special Needs Education, adopted by the UNESCO World Conference on Special Needs Education, Access and Equality, Salamanca, Spain, 7 to 10 June 1994. This has adopted by 92 governments and over 25 international organizations, putting the principles of inclusion on the educational agenda worldwide. In 1995, World Summit for Social Development, Copenhagen Declaration and Program of Action calls upon governments to ensure equal education opportunities at all levels for disabled children, youth and adults in integrated settings. In 1998, Human Rights of Persons with Disabilities, Commission on Human Rights Resolution. 2000, World Education Forum, Dhaka, Statement and Framework for Action establish attainable and affordable education goals, including the goals of ensuring that by 2015, all children of primary age have better access to complete free schooling of an acceptable quality, that gender disparities in school are eliminated, and that all aspects of educational quality are improved. 2000, Human Rights of Persons with Disabilities, Commission on Human Rights Resolution. 2001 to 2009, African Decade of Disabled Person. 2002, UN General Assembly Resolution on the Rights of the Child, following the World Summit on Children, calls upon states to take all necessary measures to ensure the full and equal enjoyment of all human rights and fundamental freedoms by children with disabilities, and to develop and enforce legislation against their discrimination so as to ensure dignity, promote self-reliance, and facilitate the child's active participation in the community, including effective access to educational and health services. 2002, a World Fit for Children outcome document of the UN General Assembly special session on children makes clear reference to the rights of children with disabilities, especially regarding protection from discrimination, full access to services, and access to proper treatment and care, as well as the promotion of family-based care and appropriate support system for families. 2003 to 2012 is known as Second Asian and Pacific Decade of Disabled Person. 2004 to 2013 is a Arab Decade of Disabled Person. 2006, UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. From 2006 to 2016, Inter-American Decade of Disabled Person. Those are the situation of internationally conventions and treaties regarding the persons with disabilities. National law on the rights of children with disabilities. Let's see. According to World Bank report on 2013, Sri Lanka has accomplished many significant education milestones, including achieving a primary enrollment rate of 98%. Universal free education policy was introduced in 1945 by the government, which was designed in order to provide education facilities free to all students from kindergarten to university education. Government of Sri Lanka signed the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, UNCRPD, on 30th March 2007 and ratified on 8th February 2016. And legal obligation toward UNCRPD came to force with effect from 9th March 2016. Despite ratifying the UNCRPD, which committed to ensuring that children with disabilities can access to quality inclusive education without discrimination, children with learning disabilities in Sri Lanka find themselves excluded from mainstream education and experience school dropout rates. The Constitution and other legislature. The government of Sri Lanka has passed legislation and policies focused on including individuals with disabilities in society. Fundamental rights for people with disabilities are guaranteed under Article 4 of the Constitution. Article 12.4 of the Constitution guarantees the right to equality and non-discrimination as fundamental rights. Public Administration Circular number 3 of 1988 to grant the 3% of vacancies in public services and public companies for the disabled candidates who had appropriate qualifications. Following acts have included the relevant provisions to ensure the well-being and security of persons with disabilities. Social Security Board Act, National Health Policy, Ranivira Seva Act. Child Protection Authority Act, number 50 of 1998. Children and Young Persons Ordinance, number 48 of 1939. This ordinance makes provisions for the establishment of juvenile courts, the supervision of juvenile offenders, and the protection of children and young persons and other connected matters. Maintenance Act number 37 of 1999 to provide for the maintenance of children, adult offspring, disabled offspring, and spouses unable to maintain themselves, to ensure compliance of the law relating to maintenance with the provisions of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child and for matters connected in regard. 1999 Amendment to the Law of Evidence in Sri Lanka permits, in cases of child abuse, the reception of videotaped evidence of the preliminary interview of a child victim or witness. This will prevent a child being further harmed by a formal legal process, which a child very often finds difficult to endure in view of his or her tender years. Judicature Act number 2 of 1978, a non-summary inquiry be dispensed within the case of statutory rape. Example, where the victim is under 16 years of age and consent to sexual intercourse is immaterial. Code of Criminal Procedure Act number 15 of 1979. Persons arrested without a warrant in respect of child abuse, the Act empowers the magistrate to order the detention of such person in police custody for a period not exceeding 3 days for purposes of investigation. Also given priority as a measure of enhancing the right of a child to protection. Evidence laws of 1895, the reception of videotaped evidence of the preliminary interview with a child victim or witness, which in addition to protecting the child also prevents cases being prejudiced by lapses of memory. Number 32 of 1999, section 163A. Penal Code Amendment Act number 22 of 1995 states that the deals preliminary with sexual offenses and offenses against children. Penal Code Amendment Act number 16 of 2006. Injuries includes psychological or mental trauma. Protection of Victims of Crime and Witness Act number 4 of 2015, where the victim is a child victim, should be treated in a manner which ensures the best interest of the child. It states it comes in the section 3B. The next act is the Employment, Women, Young Person and Children Amendment Act number 2 of 2021 states, child means a person who is under the age of 16 years, and a young person means a person who has attained the age of 16 years but still is under the age of 18 years. Situation of corporal punishment and psychological aggression in schools. Corporal punishment and psychological aggression are the two traditional methods of correcting students' misbehaviors. It is well acknowledged that they lead to a host of negative outcomes for students. In the case of children above 16 years, corporal punishment was inflicted with a cane, and in the case of children under 16, the corporal punishment would be dealt with a light cane. So the Education Ordinance regulation permitted corporal punishment only for grave misconduct or habitual idleness, and only when other methods of punishments have been tried without effect. But this completely changed after the judgment of Karunapala versus the state 2021. This comes with the fundamental rights, Article 11, 17, and 126. And even with the children with special needs should not be physically punished. The judgment was that The government regulations and policies. Schooling is compulsory for children from 5 to 16 years of age in Sri Lanka. In 1997, under general educational reforms, the government had taken a landmark decision to give inclusive education to children with disabilities in the ordinary classrooms. Children with disabilities are educated there either through inclusion in mainstream school or through specialized schools. The Sri Lankan Ministry of Education initiated special units, which were integrated special education programs within regular government schools in the late 1960s. Currently, there are 4 educational options for children with disabilities in Sri Lanka. First, specialized schools. Second, special education unit within regular education schools. Thirdly, inclusive regular education schools and special resources centers attached to regular educational schools. In 2006, under the Disabled Person Accessibility Regulations number 1 of 2006, the government took a landmark decision to make all the public places and public buildings accessible for persons with disabilities. According to Section 2 of the regulation, within a 3-year time period, all the existing public buildings and places had to be made accessible. After 9 years of implementation, today also most of the public buildings have no appropriate accessibility facilities for people with disabilities. In Dr. Ajit Pereira versus AG 2009 Supreme Court, while considering the fact Supreme Court had emphasized the necessity of implementation of said regulation in a progressive manner. Protection of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act. In 1996, Protection of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, number 28 of 1996, was formed as a key legislation to address the issues related with Sri Lankan disability rights perspective. National Council for Persons with Disability has formed as administrative body to protect rights of disabled person respectively. For its interpretation clause, persons with disabilities means any person who, as a result of any deficiency in his physical or mental capabilities, whether congenital or not, it's unable by himself to ensure for himself, wholly or partly, the necessities of life. Section 37. Purpose of this act is to set the platform for the promotion, advancement, and protection of the rights of the persons with disabilities. National Council for the Persons with Disabilities has been established as a main administrative body to take appropriate decisions on behalf of the disabled community. Apart from the minister, who was officially appointed as the president, membership of the council consists of 21 total members, with 11 from voluntary organizations and others 9 from government representation. According to Section 12 of the Act, the principal function of this council is taking appropriate measures to promote and protect the rights of persons with disabilities. Contrary to the said provision, under Section 13, the council granted powers to submit its advices and consultations for relevant ministries and government authorities in the interest of disabled people. Further, the council has power to make necessary policy framework as a guideline to government and private institutions. As a result of the series of discussions held within the state officials and disability rights activists, the proposed disability rights draft bill is prepared with more or less than 65 clauses. In comparison to the present act, it guarantees the right to medical treatment, personal mobility, and habilitation and rehabilitation as a right of peoples with disabilities. Further, it proposes to grant more powers to National Disability Authority as an independent body consistent with disability rights activists and disabled people. However, lack of consensus among the powers of proposed disability authority made a huge contention among disability rights activists and government officials. Unfortunately, due to this endless contention, Sri Lanka still has not been able to present new legislation to the parliament. The recommendations and commitments in the draft targets influencing disability rights in cross-cutting sustainable development goals. First, the existing bill is revised based on public consultations in line with the UNCRPD by the Ministry in charge. already started May 2019. Second, the draft will be available in alternative modes of communication for persons with disabilities. As example, Braille, sign language, for comments and feedback December 2019, April 2020. Approval by the Parliamentary Subcommittee and enacted of revised bill by Parliament May 2020, September 2020. The Ministry implements island-wide publicity campaign on the provisions of the Revised Disability Rights Act, highlighting the entitlement of persons with disabilities, October 2020, February 2021. So this is the brief situation of the world for protect the international law on the rights of children with disabilities and the national law on the rights of children with disabilities. I hope you get an idea about the content, and thank you very much for joining with me.